So, Red, you want to real quick do the opening?
Welcome to Devil's Advocate, where we take a side and radicalize the idea that a video game is good or bad. And today we're doing Silent Hill Downpour. I'm going to defend the shit out of it. You have no idea.
He's going to defend the living shit out of it. And I'm going to be hyperbolizing my opinions against this game in very extreme fashion.
Oh, yeah.
And halfway through the episode, we're going to come back together, and we're actually going to discuss it. And if you're in the chat, you'll be able to ask questions, put in your own comments, and be a part of the podcast yourself. Thank you for joining us.
Everybody.
Let's put on the acting role then. Red, can you summarize this game's story for us?
Silent Hill Downpour is a great anthology piece. It adds nothing to the Silent Hill lore. It only gives it a new story from a completely different perspective. Gameplay's solid, graphics are solid, whole game's pretty good.
Altogether, it's decent, yeah.
Wow, podcast over. So I won. I win.
No. We didn't even activate characters. We gotta put on our faces. Okay, well, I'm gonna put on the demon mask now. Devil's Advocate was pretty slow-paced and sloppily written. It felt very shoehorned into the Silent Hill world.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah. Almost as if the developers had a grasp at what Silent Hill was, but at the end of the day, really didn't.
You could argue that that just makes it a love letter. You could argue that it was just fan service from a team of fans who got the opportunity to produce a legitimate Silent Hill game.
Or we could just call it not a Silent Hill game.
Or you could no, because it is a Silent Hill game.
It's the antithesis of a Silent Hill game, which is the opposite of a Silent Hill game.
You right, but at the exact same time, it's still a Silent Hill game.
Murphy Pendleton has no purpose being in Silent Hill. He is a prisoner who committed revenge and now is the harbinger of somebody else's revenge.
No, Murphy Pendleton is supposed to portray some sort of revenge spirit, Punisher. He was hired as a Punisher in the prison, and it was conveniently the guy he was trying to get revenge on. But what he did before that was punish the wicked. Like, that is exactly what he did.
Well, Sewell kind of manipulates him into getting his revenge, allows Murphy, pulls the strings for Murphy to go to the prison to kill the person, all to manipulate him to kill Wheelman, essentially, at the end of the game.
Ultimately, I think it was necessary for Murphy to understand that, to come to terms with his own guilt, and to understand exactly why he is the way he is.
And then he goes back to Silent Hill?
Yeah, and I think that's why he goes back to Silent Hill, because he understands what he is, what his purpose is at that point. He realizes that he is revenge, essentially, and has to punish the wicked for their revenge. He's the embodiment of revenge. His entire life is built on revenge. He punishes people solely based on the revenge he has for one person.
But the revenge plot that we are given, we spared the police officer, the Sybil replacement, as it were, instead. So he doesn't even punish her. He lets her go.
Because he's not a manifestation of Silent Hill. Where the executioner in Silent Hill 2 was James Sunderland himself and him facing himself, Murphy Pendleton still retained consciousness and only had to face himself once. He does face off against the executioner, but after he becomes the executioner, he still retains his inner moral compass. That's why at the beginning, when I don't even remember her name, Anna is looking at you, pointing her gun at you, she is speaking to you instead of just firing. Murphy can talk, even though she sees the executioner. Murphy can still speak to her.
Murphy Pendleton and Anna's dialogue is pretty poorly written. I feel like she should have been shooting at him or chase scenes or run away from scenes. There should have been opportunities throughout the gameplay, not just in cutscenes.
Silent Hill's dialogue as a whole is pretty poorly written.
I mean, it's cheesy. But I would say like the call practices and things like that are written pretty well. If you take the time to read everything.
I think their dynamic together is poorly written, but I think it's just because it's made to be cryptic. Murphy's dynamic with himself and the world is excellent. The dialogue he has with Silent Hill and with the residents of Silent Hill, they really point to who Murphy is and what's going on around him. Like take for instance,
the Resident Evil of Silent Hill. Go ahead.
Take for instance, consoling the guy who's about to jump off of the bridge. Murphy doesn't know what consolement is.
So he's a psychopath.
His form of consoling is just to aggressively try to push people away from what they're doing. So, and it hints toward that with that moment. It doesn't tell you that until long after that moment, but it hints toward it right there that Murphy himself just is incapable of being consoling because of what's happening.
But like, was J.G. Wentworth even a necessary character?
He was.
His real name's J.P., by the way.
It was really necessary because he mirrored that of the Murphy himself. He was a man riddled with guilt who felt like it was his own fault for the deaths of a lot of children, and
it was him coming to terms.
Yeah, generally it was him coming to terms with himself. He was a reflection of Murphy if Murphy had let himself fall to the edge.
But at the same time, J.P. Wentworth, commits suicide.
Exactly.
Is that coming to terms, or is that escaping?
It's Murphy had to see it in order for his transition to come to terms to make sense.
Okay, follow-up question. Was JP alive or was he dead? Was that just was it real?
I think he's very dead, but I think it was real too. I think his spirit is one of those perpetually stuck in Silent Hill, much like the nurse in Silent Hill 1.
Well, by that logic, he would just still be alive.
Whereas, by that logic, he would still be alive, but only alive in the sense that he can be physical in Silent Hill. It's the same with the radio host. The radio host actually seems to be a lot more alive.
Rick, spinning discs all day, every day, for an eternity. Help me, I want to die.
Rick is my main homie.
I don't think the characters fit the Silent Hill already pre-existing lore all that well.
No.
They could have been written a little bit better. We could have seen their suffering. I would say Silent Hill 2 did the character development just a little bit better in regards to that. Downpour just kind of missed the mark and used them as plot devices. They're not their own entities like they were in 2. How do you feel about that?
Fair enough. I think they are plot devices, but at the same time, I think they all individually have their own place in Silent Hill. Take, for instance, I've already talked to you about the mail delivery man, the guy who's essentially, what's the word I used?
He's the Demogorgon.
Yeah, he's Samael, essentially, is what he is.
He's one of Samael's underlings that write and narrate people's torture.
Yeah.
He shows up to deliver the letters to say, hey, by the way, you're not getting out of here. You are a resident of Silent Hill now.
But where
this resident of evil.
Where every other Silent Hill would make clear that you're a resident of Silent Hill now, he's more cryptic about it in that he's kind of hinting at Murphy that there is a way out if only he come to terms with himself.
Yeah, the postman does.
The same thing the nun does. Just had to throw that in.
The nun, there's so many issues with the way the hospital functions, because the hospital was owned by the Gillespie family and it was used to take orphans and use them in their cult practices. So, like, there was some kind of conflict of interest there that kind of conflicted with how the Church of Hope had already been kind of established, including in Homecoming. It's established that way in Homecoming, so it was interesting to see Downpour use a completely different direction.
I think it worked in its favor. I think Downpour really tried hard to recognize Homecoming's existence and walk away from it.
Make better of it.
Yeah.
I would say that.
Make
But-
light of a bad situation.
I mean, if you're gonna play a Silent Hill game, don't play Downpour. I mean, don't play Homecoming.
Yeah, don't play Homecoming. You were super salty when you saw the Shepherd's Glen picture on the wall.
Oh my god, it's so bad. Just rip that cannon right out of the game, please. We don't need it. We don't need it. Like, if there's gonna be a new Silent Hill game, I'm okay with the world of Downpour being tied in some way. Like, if a new game can be written and tied together Murphy Pendleton's kind of reasoning for being around a little bit better than these writers did, fine. But that doesn't make it a good game.
Whereas, you know where I stand. I prefer the anthology approach to Silent Hill.
Yeah, it's like more poetic.
Yeah. Because there is a rhyme and reason for everything. There's just no need to keep these things tied together. I love Silent Hill's small nods and love letters, while at the same time recognizing Murphy Pendleton as his own entity in his own Silent Hill, which is linked with her Silent Hill. I mean, Anna is, for all intents and purposes, a very important character, especially if you read the comic books. They weren't great, the ones that came with Downpour, but goddamn if they didn't explain a lot of why she was there. Not everybody who plays Downpour is going to go looking to read the comic books, and I get that. And you don't really need to know more about her to understand why Murphy Pendleton is there.
And just to be clear, when he says the comic books, he's not talking about Dying Light. He's not talking about any of the shithole Silent Hill comic books. He's talking about the comic book for Downpour, the one that came with the manual for the game.
Yeah, it was much better than the rest of the Silent Hill comic books. It was made to go with the property that it went with.
Yeah, the Silent Hill comic books, as it stands, are literal trash. Like, they were manufactured trash.
Let's do visuals. You start.
The visuals of Downpour for its generation were, I would say, mediocre. A lot of repeating textures, a lot of repeating assets. A lot of the buildings felt the same. You would walk through a door into a building, and it would be, like, not unique. Nothing really grabbed at me as unique until the nightmare sections. It was when we entered the nightmare sections that the world felt built, and then we were running through it, getting back into the mechanics because that's my focus. We didn't get to enjoy it. There was so much to look at, and I didn't get to.
Because you cheesed the fuck out of the game.
No, because you're getting chased by the darkness or something along those lines. We're just in the nightmare, forced out of the nightmare.
I agree, it would have been much nicer to see more of the nightmare, but Murphy was more in tune with overworld Silent Hill, let's call it.
Well, they're one and the same, but yeah.
Yeah. I think the repetition is good for the player. Like, I would argue Silent Hill 2's apartment building is the epitome of repetition. And it gives the player that sense that they're lost, right? When you really can't tell what direction you're going unless you're paying close attention, the feeling of getting lost in Silent Hill really builds the tension and the suspense for what comes next when you finally do make your way forward.
Yeah, but at the same time, the way that they handled the map in Downpour, I didn't find it useful. Whereas in Silent Hill 1 and 2, the map is almost critical to you playing. That feeling of lost and dread is then resurfaced when you're like, I can pull out my map and see what door is locked, where I need to go, blah blah blah.
I would be a hypocrite if I said you were wrong there, because for the entirety of the beginning of the game, I didn't even pick up the map.
I used the map in the libraries. That was it. The most fleshed out area of Silent Hill Downpour, in my opinion, would have to be the library.
Really?
Yeah, I really wanted more of that.
It was a good segment. I wanted more of the apartment. I mean, I know it would have just been taken from Silent Hill 2, but I feel like the idea of Murphy Pendleton visualizing his own tattered life through the eyes of the apartment would have been very interesting. Much like it did with James Sunderland and with Heather Mason. Like, I don't even like Silent Hill 3, but it handled the apartment well.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't even remember Downpour's apartments. I remember going into them, doing tiny little side quests, and then leaving. I don't think they were memorable.
No, yeah, they were there just for the sake of existing, and that was unfortunate.
Yeah.
At the same time, they had a really nice atmosphere. The rocking chair made its first appearance there, which is, I mean...
Oh, and the movie theater. What the fuck happens with the movie theater? Sorry, I don't mean to break conversation, but we went to the movie theater and nothing ever happened there.
We never finished the side quest. I never took the bulb back, and I don't think you did either.
I don't... Doesn't need side quests. Just make a quest that flows.
Every Silent Hill had side quests.
Silent Hill 1, Silent Hill 2, and Silent Hill 3 use side quests a little bit differently, where this one feels like the game was written and linearized, and then they just added other things along the way. It didn't feel like they, from the start, knew what they were doing. The game was being developed. Oh, let's just add this. That's how I felt.
Well, given they only had
6 months.
6 months, less time than Fallout New Vegas to build the massive Silent Hill that they built, I think it's rather impressive.
But as a writer, that would be a stain on my career.
Much like Silent Hill 3 is a stain on that writer's career.
Yes. But he's a musician, so it doesn't really matter. Akira Yamaoka! I love you! Thank you for making the medium.
Can't wait to get to that.
It's gonna be fun.
Silent Hill Downpour's audio design.
Some areas were great, some areas were terrible. It really came down to like how well they faded the audio and how well they didn't fade the audio, or how well they used the structure. And when we went into the one basement with the beating heart, right? Great, very tense. They dropped the music. They allow the pipes to ring out and make their noises as you progress. You hear the slooshing of your footsteps. The atmosphere was good. And I was like, this is it. This is when Silent Hill Downpour shows me it's good.
Was always in the side quest. Silent Hill Downpour, as much as I hate to say, is not a game about its main story as much as it feels like it. There's so much to do in the rest of Silent Hill that's worth seeing.
The side quests make it fun.
They really do.
Yeah.
It's a very interesting world. And it's the first time we've ever been able to experience Silent Hill in this open-ended fashion.
Yes. Because it's the antithesis of Silent Hill.
Yeah. Most of the time, everybody is trapped and stuck on a linear path that they're allowed to stray from, sort of, but not really.
Not really. The game kind of just holds your hand the whole way through.
Yeah.
I would argue that the holding hand situation and the way that the maps are designed is, again, it is the antithesis of Silent Hill, because it does not follow the same credence of what Silent Hill 1 was, where here you are, good luck.
And I think
you got to get to the elementary school, good luck. You got to get these keys, good luck. Here's a puzzle. We're not giving you any info on it.
And I think that works with Silent Hill Downpour being the story antithesis of Silent Hill 2. It's Murphy Pendleton getting to visualize the things that have happened to souls previously, the things that are going to happen to souls in the future. He gets to take notice of Silent Hill more so than everybody else, and gets to have this deeper understanding that not everybody is given, because he's not a purely wicked person like everybody else.
Yeah, he's a conflicted character.
Yeah. Much like Anna. She's a very conflicted character.
Is she, though?
She is. She never intentionally murdered anybody. She had extreme revenge and felt bad about Murphy Pendleton, but when they get out of Silent Hill, the thing that breaks the cycle and gets them out of Silent Hill is her forgiving Murphy Pendleton and deciding that she doesn't want to kill an innocent man.
So, we're reaching 30 minutes. Just going to make that clear real quick.
Yeah.
When you get the acceptance ending, she still kills Sewell. Or at least it's alluded that she kills Sewell. We don't see it happen, so we can't confirm that she kills him. She could shoot him in the knee, ruin his career. There's a number of things.
Even if she had, it would be the same situation with Murphy Pendleton killing What's-His-Face at the beginning of the game.
Would she end up back in Silent Hill for her actions?
Most likely.
So you think, regardless, She goes, kills Sewell, and then goes back to Silent Hill because she is drawn to it. She can't escape it now.
Pretty much, and I think that's a big part of what draws Murphy back to Silent Hill at the end of that ending.
Do you think Murphy knows that he's meant to kill her?
He knows, and he knows what she's going to do now that he's forgiven her, and he knows that he has unfinished work. Honestly, I hated the direct sequel idea for Silent Hill 3, but I would love to know more about what happens with Murphy, Pendleton, and Anna. I would love to see the second part of that story.
I don't.
Yeah.
I want Silent Hill dead.
Nice. Wow.
As the devil's advocate, I'm just saying, we don't need more Silent Hill. It's over. Let it die. We don't need Silent Hills. We don't need anything.
Just sell it to Hideo Kojima.
Or give it back to Kojima Productions, yes. I don't think he's going to do anything with it, but yeah. Because he's not even a part of Team Silent.
I think if given the license, Hideo Kojima is a deep enough and crazy enough writer and director that he would do something pretty spectacular with it. Then again, I'm pretty sure Silent Hills was canned before it ever started.
It was. He admitted that.
Yeah.
There's tons and tons of blurbs in Silent Hills that says, hey, this game's not coming out. Downpour, I mean, the final boss was dumb. It wasn't good. The enemy design was repetitious. We saw, 3 enemies throughout the entire game? 4 enemies throughout the entire game? Not good. You know, the environments are supposed to be different enough and symbolic to the character. I didn't feel that with his character. What is the symbolism of the movie theater? What is the symbolism of him going through these clock towers in time? I'm sure there are answers, but they just seem so, again, shoot in. What do you feel about that?
I think that's something that we both would have to explore the game more to understand fully, because there are literal tons of side quests that neither of us got to, and finishing a side quest unlocks more side quests in the world.
Listen, after the side quest where I had to play what's different between the mirror and the real world or whatever, I was done. Like, that was it for me. That ruined it.
I thought it was a good stopping point because it's not something necessary. It's a simple puzzle with a simple reward.
It was dumb, is what it was.
I think there are a lot of people who wouldn't have been as perceptive about it as you were, though.
True. I can say that.
Yeah.
But even then, like, I'm also used to Silent Hill being like, here's a ton of puzzles. And there were some good ones. There was the color puzzle with the poem. That was good. Where was that throughout the game? Where were more of those?
I think the UV light being used for some more of the around the world puzzles was very interesting, and they used that well in the sense of codes on the wall, things that you would have to, I mean, because it gave you a reason to look around. Yeah. They were encouraging exploration more than anything.
It was a cool concept, other than you can see like the people's foot path and things like that. Thought that was kind of dumb. That's not how UV lights work.
It was really dumb, but there were some moments where the footprint pathways would go somewhere, and I would ask myself, but wait, why did this go here? What was the point of this? And come to find out much later on, reading a document or noticing something in a room, there was a real purpose for it. There was always some side story that you just had to observe.
Mm-hmm.
Like finding the key card on the guard in the library. It was simple. You see the footprints in front of the door, and you walk in and you see him all beaten and torn up, but they're not his footprints. And it leaves you with this lingering, so there's something else in here with me, before you ever see the mannequins pop out of the glass.
Yeah, but I knew that the mannequins were going to come to life because that's not... They were so outside of where they should have been. If that was like a mall sequence, and then all of a sudden these mannequins that we continue to see, some of them came to life, then you have Dread. You're building Dread.
Well, in all fairness, this was a giant library with a ton of paintings and portraits and artwork. And there was even artwork of the mannequin on the wall.
Yeah, which was dumb.
I don't think it was dumb.
They showed the shepherd's house. So dumb.
I'd like to know how the mannequins are symbolic to Murphy Pendleton, because I still don't quite understand that. But
it's his projection. It's how he projects himself. It's not truly him.
I honestly don't think the monsters in Silent Hill, other than the prisoners, have anything to do with Murphy anyway. I think the Shriekers and the mannequins are Anna's monsters.
I don't know, maybe. There's only 4 monsters. If we saw some more monsters that made sense to Murphy and more monsters that made sense to Anne, then we can clarify that. But at this point, it would just be speculation.
Yeah. That again goes back to them not having much time to develop the game, though.
Do you think that the rain was good?
I think the rain was a phenomenal idea because it didn't use the siren effect from the first Silent Hill to portray itself. It was the same idea, a warning that danger was coming.
But it never came.
Well, that's after when the rain came down, monsters would be more aggressive. You would see more patrol cars out.
Were they more aggressive?
They really were, especially if you played on hard. You played on easy, right? So combat to combat, it's not really the same experience.
It is the same experience.
It's really not.
It really is. I loaded it up. I played on hard. It was the same thing. Oh no, I have to press the triangle button a couple more times.
Yeah.
The enemies were never a threat to me. Not once.
Don't you think that fits with Murphy not being the soul that's under torment here, though? Like, why would the world be aggressive to Murphy if it had no reason to? I mean, other than the boogeyman. I mean, the boogeyman makes sense. I get that the monsters
showed that it was, though.
I get that the monsters are just aggressive for the sake of being aggressive in most instances.
Yeah.
Right? And that's true for most of Silent Hill. Where, like, monsters and their aggression isn't exactly thrilling in Silent Hill Downpour. I would say the game does often tell you to just run past things anyway.
Is that good?
Yeah, I think it's good to observe the world. I think because the monsters don't just attack you. If you stopped and paid close attention, they would attack each other. They had small routines. They were behaving almost like citizens.
I would say it was bad because when you go and play something like Silent Hill 1, the game doesn't outright tell you, hey, if you want this ending, just run past everything. You have to figure it out. And that's good. Because the game's already cryptic.
But the mumblers, dude. But the mumblers.
Yeah, exactly. It's a challenge.
It wasn't challenging, it was cheap.
You don't have to kill it. If you can knock it down and run away, it's still alive.
I thought they were a super cheap addition, and in that same
not that game.
Silent Hill not having very many monsters, I mean, Silent Hill 1 didn't have very many monsters either.
It's also a PS1 game.
Yeah.
And it's massive for what it is. So I wouldn't even want to use that as an argument.
But that's just the thing, right? For the 6 months they had, even if it didn't have many monsters, Silent Hill Downpour was relatively massive. Like the map of Silent Hill,
world, yes.
The map of Silent Hill is so big that they had to split it into 2 areas in order to get it to load properly.
3 areas.
3 areas in order to get it to load properly. It's a 3-tiered
Well,
map.
let's get into the loading because holy crap, is this one stuttery fucking game.
You played the Xbox port.
It doesn't matter.
Not an excuse. Yeah,
it doesn't matter. It's stuttery. And they promised to fix it. And they never did.
Well,
and the PS3 port PS3 version isn't that much better. It still stutters.
It did get fixed though, for the most part.
No,
it got its patches.
No, bad.
No.
It made it bad. There were points in the game where you fight things, and if you run towards the ladder, it would stutter so bad that you would just die.
I didn't.
You had to specifically avoid areas to not die.
See, I didn't have that problem. The only real loading problems I had, other than like being out in the woods segment during the Hansel and Gretel segment, which was just bad, right? Other than that moment, the only real stuttering or loading I encountered was when I would go to open a door and the game would load. But at that point, everything would freeze until the game was loaded.
Bad.
No.
Call things better. It's just,
don't compile shaders every 20 seconds.
Well, yeah, definitely not. That's why the video game like Silent Hill 1 and 2 use the shadow, because it's using the shadow to block your view, and it can render things in. This game could have used things like that if they were running into issues, but they just had to shove the downpour feature in your face, which was useless in my opinion. In your face, just really aggressively shove it in your face, and then it comes out to be nothing, and then the game is still a stuttery mess with really terrible texture popping.
I mean, I only had texture pop in when a brand new area would load or when I would continue. But after being to an area once and returning to it, I really never had that problem.
And I'd like to say to chat, you played on RCP CS3 because you own the game, but you don't have a PS3, right?
Which I honestly think made the game... I used to have a PS3, and I have a physical copy of the PS3 version.
Mm-hmm.
I honestly think RPCS3 made the game a little stutterier than it was before, even unlocking the frame rate. Just...
Did you play it off of an SSD?
Yeah.
I think you had a better gaming experience.
I think I had a pretty poor one. I actually didn't have many of the problems I was having on my PS3.
Because I used an Xbox 360 E model with an SSD mod, and it was still a mess.
That's because the Xbox port is a mess. I kept telling you
the
that.
Game is a mess.
Not really.
Yes.
The game didn't have a lot of time.
You can't just sideline it like that, though.
I can, though, because for the time it had, for the amount of time it had from a developer perspective, it is very impressive. Extremely impressive. They were a small team who had only ever done one game before, given one of the most massive projects they could have possibly been given with a name that's impossible to live up to.
All right,
I think it's very impressive.
We're gonna drop Devil's Advocate so we can talk about our true feelings here. We're gonna drop the hyperbole. 1, 2, 3. All right. So for the last 30 minutes, I'm gonna give you my true opinion.
Yeah.
All in all, like, if you're not a Silent Hill fan, right? Like, if you're somebody who just wants to try it, this isn't the worst game to play, but I wouldn't say stop there. I would say try to get your hands on 1 or 2.
Silent Hill 2 especially. Like, to me, that is the definitive Silent Hill game.
You think so?
You would disagree with me, and I understand where you're coming from with Silent Hill 1. I really do.
Well, Silent Hill 1, it just does it in it's a game that does cryptic, in my opinion, the best.
It's the progenitor to the entire series. Really, nothing could live up to the idea that the original writer had.
And like we've discussed this off stream, but if we started discussing it, it would take 5-6 hours. You don't like 3. I like 3. That's all we need to say.
And it really comes down to that matter of perspective where you think the timeline is a better idea, and I think the anthology is.
I only think 1 and 3 is the only necessary sequel and prequel in the game. That's it. And I don't even look at it as a sequel and prequel. You have your arguments. I have my arguments. Trent loves 3.
I can't. I've played it so many times now. I just can't. I really have tried. On a
I wasn't. Hang on. I have a thought I need to finish. I'm sorry. But what Silent Hill 1 did is they created a game where you can run through it and scratch your head at the ending, the bad ending per se, where you kill and Heather is never born. You can say that is the canon ending, you could say that's not the canon ending, but Team Silent says Heather being born is the canon ending. And that's pretty cool that like we have these totally parallel concepts. And you could still be scratching your head wondering why these happened. And if you don't take the time to explore the environment and understand that the fire that Alessa suffered was an accident. Shut up, Alexa. if you don't understand like why the nightmare was an accident and things like that, you could hate Alessa and not understand her purpose.
Okay, so now is a total first for Ian. I've been kind of holding this back for days now because Silent Hill Downpour is just such a meme at this point. I think it's so aggressively mediocre that it's painful because there are so many good things about it that it makes me hate it.
Downpour?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay. Wow. You said you loved it.
I really do, right? And it's such a conflicting love-hate relationship because like you said when we first started streaming, the things that it does right, it does so right. It does really right. And the things that it does wrong are just unforgivable.
Yeah.
It really is so hard to say that I love Silent Hill Downpour because I want to. I just can't. It just can't happen. If
you just want a not all that scary horror game that you can play without any context of Silent Hill, Downpour is phenomenal. It's a great horror game, but you can just run around, you can save, load, do all these little side quests along the way. It's a good time. But if you're trying to
walking into it like it's not a Silent Hill game.
Absolutely.
Look at it like its own entity, completely segregated from Silent Hill. It has nothing to do really with Silent Hill other than taking place in the same place. Right? And
barely.
even then, barely. You could ignore Silent Hill completely, and it would be, on its own, a relatively good time.
But it would still bring me back to my ending. I don't like the ending. I don't like how they handled the church.
Yeah, that all kind of plays together into the mess that it is.
Some of the puzzles were good, but they didn't hold on to the strength of the puzzles. Like, Silent Hill has strong puzzles. It always has had strong puzzles.
In one portion of the game, it's clear that they're putting a ton of emphasis on their puzzles. And then you get middle way through, and it's clear that they're putting a ton of emphasis on the darkness.
Yeah.
And then you get to the end, and they're trying to balance things out, but they're putting more emphasis on exploring the nightmare prison, which wasn't even the nightmare. All that great.
It wasn't even the nightmare.
Yeah.
Because all of the Silent Hill Downpour nightmare segments are running segments.
Yeah.
They were all Silent Hill Shattered Memories moments.
Which, fair enough. I mean, from fans of Silent Hill, I guess they must have been fans of Shattered Memories. I know a lot of people are.
Mm-hmm.
So it makes sense that they would take something away from it. And I would argue it does it a little bit better because at least it's not the entire game.
It does do it better. I would say very much so it does it better.
Yeah.
There is psychological horror in Downpour. Like, again, going back to the basement with the beating heart, that was a Silent Hill moment. If I grabbed that heart and the nightmare segment opened up, like, and we were in the same area, right? But it opens up and it has a cinematic of the monster crawling out of the sewer. Like, it could have been so good.
And they had so much to work with. They had so many creative transitions into the nightmare world. It was unbelievable how seamless a lot of it was most of the time.
They just didn't expand upon it well enough.
Yeah, which is super unfortunate. It could have been so much more than it was.
My heart goes out to Vatra because I feel like if they were given 2 years, right? They were like, Vatra Studios is making Silent Hill, right? And they were given the time necessary. Somebody would have played through Homecoming at QC. I do QC work, if you guys didn't know that. And said, hey, you have something here. You just need Silent Hill. You just need to add Silent Hill.
Really, and that's what it comes down to, is the amount of time they had. Had it not been for Konami just pushing out another Silent Hill from an independent studio, Vatra would have been a tremendously good studio to handle Silent Hill Downpour, and it could have been such a good game.
It really could have. The love letters were good. They were good. When they were good, they were great. But
just so sad it turned out the way it did.
There was no executioner like Silent Hill 2. Like, the Silent Hill 2 Pyramid Head executioner is so memorable. And Heather Mason is so memorable to people that, of course, they're going to ham-fist it into everything. But what Silent Hill Downpour did well is they did a nice twist on the Silent Hill 2 lore of him blaming himself and creating this executioner. He was the executioner. He was the antithesis of Silent Hill, becoming what he dreaded. That was good. Expand on that.
The convenience too shows with Anna. If they had done more with Anna in game, it would have made so much more sense.
Mm-hmm.
It was so convenient that they both happened to end up in Silent Hill at the same time, and they could have used that.
Yeah. I'm gonna quote a DC comic book writer here. I apologize I don't have his name, but he says every single good story starts with a great villain. And that's what Downpour was missing. It needed something for the player to connect to hate or disapprove of or question as much as Murphy would. But instead, it was overall cryptic.
We kind of had a villain, but he wasn't really our villain. I feel like Murphy should have been more tormented by Sewell than he was by...
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
The Wheelman. Coolridge.
Yeah, it just was one of those things that they missed a huge opportunity. Coolridge could have been like Monocle Man, the skin face, who was playing the role of who was the fat guy, it could have been like that. Sewell could have been another tormented soul like that, pushing Murphy further toward the edge. And, it would have made for a great villain at the end.
I would have liked Coolridge, the Wheelman, not to be his progenitor, because Coolridge being a guiding factor and then Sewell being the tormentor itself would have given Murphy a lot more purpose.
I kind of understand. The more I think about it, though, I kind of understand the end boss fight, the symbolism. Murphy, against the guidance of the only man he looked up to, decided to pull the plug, and ultimately it got him killed.
I don't like the ending.
I know you don't. And it's not really a boss fight. It's not really it's so cryptic in the way it's... I wouldn't recommend it to anybody who's a fan of good writing.
No way. Because, okay, so when you write a video game, one of the most important things to understand is mechanical development. How you explain to the player what you're doing can be used through mechanical dialogue, which is the process of putting the player through something, showing them rather than telling them.
Exactly.
Downpour doesn't show us enough.
And it really is unfortunate. You have to go looking for the things to be shown them, and everything ends up very blatant.
A great example would be like Mega Man 1. Understand, they immediately show you how the game works.
Yeah.
Super Mario 64, they show you, they don't tell you. They give you a playground, and then you can move on with you just dicking around with the controls,
Resident Evil 4.
Resident Evil 4, Resident Evil 1.
A house. It's so good how seamless tutorials showing the player the environment and the world are handled in games.
Again, Silent Hill 1, where you just run in the beginning. You don't fight anything, and then it purposely kills you. It shows you that these enemies are bad, but you don't die. It begins the game.
Yeah. In my conclusion about Silent Hill Downpour, my honest conclusion about Silent Hill Downpour is I can't call it a bad game. I can't call it a good game. I can call it an unfortunate game.
It's very much so unfortunate.
Because ultimately, there was so much potential that just didn't get to come through.
And I'm sorry, Voucher Games. It sucks. It's bad. It's bad. I don't like it.
If anybody from Botcher Games has any follow-ups or would like to get a hold of either of us, follow up with an interview about the development process of the game, how things went, we would love some inside input on Silent Hill Downpour. Really, it would be such an eye-opener to know exactly why the game turned out the way it did.
I would specifically like to talk to the person who did the mechanics and the person who wrote the main story. I don't want to talk to Tom Hewlett, ever. I have words for him that are not kind. Sorry, Tom Hewlett, if you ever see this video and or podcast. I never want to hear from you. I don't like you. It's just how it is. It's never going to change. Sell the IP already.
Serious.
You're not a true fan. It's the end of the story.
Who cares. Yeah.
Give it to Hideo Kojima. Go make $1 million selling it to Hideo Kojima, and go make your poorly executed horror games somewhere else. That's just how I feel.
Yeah. At the end, big shout outs to Botcher Games for literally doing everything you could with the time you had.
You really did make something that divided the community.
It left a lot of questions. Whether we think the criticism was too much or too little, it left a lot of questions, and it left a good impression and a bad impression on a lot of people.
You showed people what not to do when making a Silent Hill fan game.
And at the exact same time had moments where you showed exactly what to do, which really shows that you were fans of the property before you got to making it.
Yes. And I can also understand, like, this is a game that is a product of its environment and its time. You know, Call of Duty was huge. A lot of action stuff was huge. The films were coming out, you know, and you didn't cheap out and use the films in your game. I mean, the mannequins were kind of a cop-out, but at least you used them uniquely. You weren't Homecoming that was just hours of running away from things and then fighting a puppet. You weren't hours of running up and down these staircases that were just bad. Like,
you weren't trying to tell any more Harry Mason story.
Yeah. Well, I mean, he's dead, so.
Or Heather Mason, or Alessa story, either.
Yeah.
I mean, you left those things where they belong in the past.
You let people who already played the game just assume, and that's fine. This game was so split because if you're a Silent Hill fan, there are things that make sense, and if you're not, well, then it's still fine because it still works as a horror game.
Yeah.
So you're left once again in the middle. You literally went in the middle and we're like, we're just going to make something that might sell well. But the legacy of Silent Hill is for hardcore horror fans, and that probably didn't help your sales. And then you had the legacy of Silent Hill with games like Homecoming and the 2 movies, and people just didn't want to play your game. So it sucks that that happened.
You were given a bad time and an IP that had already been dragged through hell and back.
Yeah. Let Silent Hill die. Let the Medium or something do it. Let the Evil Within do it. Well, the Evil Within 2 was... We'll save that for another day.
Yeah, we'll get to that.
Evil Within 1 was better than 2. End of story.
I wish anybody would have agreed with me on that back in the day.
I agree with you. And we hardly agree on anything. And that's Devil's Advocate.
Yeah.
That's why we made this podcast.
Do we have any questions or anything from the chat before we finish up?
Trent says he loves Silent Hill 3. We're actually trying to avoid talking about that because Red and I get very heated on the topic.
Yeah.
It's just, it won't be good for the show. If we ever do come full circle around the Silent Hill 3, it'll probably be quite a ways into Devil's Advocate because we're going to have to be able to control ourselves.
Yeah, and it's a very intense conversation because as much as we would like the one side or the other to be an act in that regard, it literally is, he is one side and I am the other. It's such a hard conversation to have.
Trent, Downpour or Homecoming? Homecoming is not a video game. It doesn't exist. Don't ever play it.
Yeah, it is a pretty bad game. It doesn't feel good. It doesn't look good. It doesn't sound good or smell good or...
Silent Saw 3 Downpour of Homecoming Edition 6.0 HD 3000 Turbo Edition Redux.
The remake, the reboot, the movie.
The movie. The poem. Readapted into a novel. Yeah, Homecoming, just avoid it at all costs. It's not worth it. The game isn't developed well. You can get yourself killed just by walking into a boss fight you didn't know was there. The game does not put you on the path of finding things. At least Downpour puts you on the path of finding things.
On that note, avoid Silent Hill Origins too.
Yes.
Unless you look at Silent Hill Origins for the joke it was supposed to be, don't play Silent Hill Origins.
If you want a origin story, just play Silent Hill 1.
Agreed.
Like, yes, the mechanics are hard. Yes, the controls are difficult. But you just learn it. If you just play, you will just learn it.
I would argue that harder to use controls just means steeper learning curve, just means builds more tension.
It really does. It really does. And one of the things a lot of people don't understand is Silent Hill's combat and movement were designed on purpose. They took what they saw with a little known video game known as Resident Evil 1, and they took that and they were like, we could utilize this kind of thing in our horror concept and just bump it up a little bit. We can flesh out the melee combat.
Make it more about the horror.
Yeah. Yes, I mean, if you saw me play through Silent Hill, I fly through that game because I've played it so much. I used to speedrun it, for Christ's sake. The mechanics are not hard. I don't run into the walls and...
I floundered about randomly.
Yeah. Nothing will be gained from floundering about at random.
Everything was gained. I got through hard, baby, almost. I still have to finish that.
I was genuinely concerned with Downpour going into it, because if I came out of that game saying I enjoyed it, I don't know what I would be anymore. Like, I would have so many questions about me as a developer. You know what I mean?
It's definitely one of those games that you can enjoy sometimes and won't enjoy others.
I would pick up my notebook and be like, everything I write is bad because I like Downpour.
It was super interesting to hear you pick up a notebook for Downpour.
Mm-hmm. I pick up a notebook for every game. I have notebooks upon notebooks that I could write a walkthrough for like 90 games just with my notebooks alone.
It's such a lost art form, writing notes.
Oh, love it. Love writing notes.
There was a single moment in Silent Hill Downpour where Murphy Pendleton stuck a combination in his notebook. And that was it. That was the only time they ever did it, and I think they realized that it wasn't the right way to handle things.
There was a lot of things that they did wrong.
There was.
Just tell an engaging story.
And now you know, I don't like Silent Hill Downpour as much as I came off as I did.
And yeah, I'm happy to hear that, honestly.
It was bothering you so much that I enjoyed it and was defending it so hard. At the end of the day, it still does crack my top 100. It's down there in the 90s. It is a game I'd go back to.
No.
It's one of those games I'd go back to just because I like it by itself.
Now but to end the stream with a conflicting statement, Red. Let's end the stream with a conflicting statement. Downpour is as good as Amnesia.
You're right.
Amnesia was not good, and it should have never been the hit that it was. Sorry, that studio sucks. All right. Trent agrees. We're going to come back and play Cryptex later. This is going to be cut out of the podcast, but if anybody's watching and wants to see Cryptex, Red and Chris and I will be playing Cryptex together on this channel, because I have to stream it to them because it's essentially a movie.
If you're listening on Spotify, check out I'm Zephyrian on Twitch and Red Barrel for the win. That's me on YouTube.
Mm-hmm. FTW BERYL Barrel.
Yeah, that. Thank you for clarifying that.
You're welcome.
Much like our conversations, our content differs extremely and is polar opposite. I think you would really get a kick out of it if you enjoy listening to the podcast.
Oh yeah. Well, Sleepy Boys, the show is way more comical. Yeah. All right, Silent Hill Downpour, bad game, mediocre game. Don't play it unless you want a basic bitch.
No. Game. Play it if you're a fan of Resident Evil or Alone in the Dark 2009, or just horror games in general, and don't play it if you're a fan of Silent Hill.
Facts. Thank you for joining us, and we will see you or talk to you in the next podcast.